Back in the early 90s, my family had just moved to a brand new town, the kind of place where every street felt unfamiliar and every hallway in school echoed with voices that already belonged there. I was the new kid starting high school with absolutely no sense of where I fit. Most of the students had known each other since childhood. They already had their established cliques, inside jokes, routines, and I was the outsider trying to figure out where to stand so I didn't look lost. But there was one kid, Tad. That was the name he preferred, short and casual, just like his personality. Everyone liked Tad. He was outgoing, funny in a genuine way, charming without trying. But strangely, he didn't belong to any friend group. He floated from one circle to another, always welcome but never attached. And somehow, after a few days, he decided I was the person he wanted to hang around. He became my first real friend there. That November, Tad handed me an envelope, a neat, formal-looking thing that did not match his laid-back nature. Inside was a beautifully printed Thanksgiving invitation to dinner at the Smiths' house, not their real name. Even the font looked expensive and old-fashioned. Tad acted strangely about it too, almost like he hoped I'd decline, though at the time I was too excited to notice the hesitation in his eyes. I was unsure. My family always did Thanksgiving together at my aunt and uncle's house. It was tradition. But when I asked my parents, they insisted that I accept. "There will be plenty of Thanksgivings," they said. "Make friends. Enjoy yourself." So I agreed. And by the time Thanksgiving Day arrived, I was actually looking forward to it. But the moment Tad answered the door, everything felt off. He was dressed strangely formal, almost like a character from a retro commercial. Hair slicked back, wearing a pressed waistcoat, neat trousers, the sort of outfit you'd expect someone to wear to church. Not a family dinner in the 90s. Meanwhile, I stood in typical teenager clothes, instantly feeling out of place. Tad looked me over, anxiety flickering across his face, but said nothing. Inside, things only grew stranger. The Smith house felt lifeless, too clean, too empty, too silent. No photos, no decorations, no lived-in mess. Just immaculate rooms that looked staged for a catalog. His mother and younger sister were polite, almost too polite, and noticeably thin, like they were quietly exhausted or malnourished. His mother, Jennifer, apologized gently that I wasn't dressed formally, hoping Mr. Smith would understand. That name, Mr. Smith, hung heavy in the air. When we entered the dining room, my stomach tightened. The Thanksgiving spread was pathetic. A small turkey, 8 lonely roast potatoes, a sad pot of mac and cheese, and limp, gray vegetables. Nothing about it resembled the warm, festive dinners I grew up with. And looming at the head of the table was Mr. Smith, stiff and expressionless, like a statue dressed in human skin. Tad leaned close and whispered rules. Call him sir. Maintain eye contact. Never speak unless spoken to. My skin prickled. This wasn't a quirky family. This felt like stepping into someone else's hidden religion. What followed would become one of the most disturbing Thanksgivings of my life. And it was only beginning. We all stood behind our chairs as Mr. Smith began what I assumed would be a traditional Thanksgiving blessing. Instead, he launched into a long, rambling monologue. Not a prayer, not a speech, but something in between. He never mentioned God, Jesus, or any higher power. It was just a strange, droning reflection about gratitude that seemed directed at no one and nothing. At the time, I brushed it off. Later, I'd realize how unsettling that really was. Finally, we sat. Mr. Smith carved the turkey for himself first, slow and deliberate, piling every piece of the best-looking meat onto his own plate. When he finished, I reached casually for a potato, not even touching it yet, and that S when it happened, without warning, without a single word. Mr. Smith backhanded me across the face. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. My vision blurred for a second. There wasn't much pain, but the humiliation, the shock, hit me harder than the slap itself. I had never been struck by an adult who wasn't my parent, let alone the father of a friend. But what chilled me most was how normal it seemed to everyone else. Tad stiffened but said nothing. His little sister stared down at her hands, and Mrs. Smith, thin, trembling, rushed forward to explain in a fragile voice. We always allow the man of the house to finish serving himself entirely before anyone else takes food. I apologize for the misunderstanding, Mr. Smith added sharply. In this home, the man of the house usually finishes his whole portion before anyone else begins. But tonight we make an exception. For a guest who does not understand respect, every instinct told me to walk out. But something about the silence in that room, the way the family behaved, made me feel like walking out wasn't an option. The tension was thick, oppressive. Dinner continued under Mr. Smith's heavy stare, and eventually Mrs. Smith quietly prompted me to take some food. My hand shook as I served myself. The food was even worse up close. The vegetables were hard and undercooked. The mac and cheese was gritty, the pasta practically raw, and the turkey pink, slimy, soft in the wrong places. It wasn't just unappetizing, it was dangerously undercooked. The family barely touched their food, picking at it like they knew exactly how disgusting it was. Meanwhile, Mr. Smith devoured his plate with disturbing enthusiasm, tearing into the raw turkey like it was a delicacy. Halfway through, my stomach started cramping. The pain sharpened quickly, twisting deep inside me. I pushed the food around on my plate, hoping no one would notice. But Mr. Smith noticed everything. He glared. "Eat up, son," he said coldly. It is rude to be ungrateful to one's host. Finally, unable to bear it, I whispered that I had a stomachache, and asked if I could call my parents to pick me up. That was my mistake. The entire Smith family froze. Tad went pale. Mrs. Smith's hands started shaking. Even the little sister lowered her eyes, and Mr. Smith's face turned a deep, horrifying shade of red, a controlled fury that felt far more dangerous than yelling. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stood. When he opened his mouth, everything spiraled. Mr. Smith rose from his chair as if pulled upward by pure rage. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitch beneath his skin. For a moment, no one breathed. No one moved. His silence was more terrifying than if he had screamed. Then he did. "How dare you!" he roared. The table rattled. My fork slipped from my hand. Tad's sister flinched so hard she nearly toppled her cup. And then the lecture began, a violent, spitting tirade about manners, respect, gratitude, and kids these days being entitled, uncouth, and morally rotten. He spoke like a tyrant addressing a prisoner, not a teenager at Thanksgiving dinner. But very quickly, his fury turned. Suddenly, he wasn't yelling at me anymore. He was screaming at Tad. "It's your fault," he thundered. "You brought this disrespectful boy into my home. You brought someone from the wrong side of town." Tad's face crumpled. He apologized over and over, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. Sir, he didn't mean it. He didn't know. Please, sir." And that's when everything snapped into horrifying clarity. This wasn't a father. This wasn't a family. This was a man who ruled his household through fear so deep it ran like a current under everything they did. Before I could process it, Mr. Smith grabbed Tad by the arm and yanked him upright so violently the chair skidded backward. He dragged Tad across his lap like a child, pulled his pants down to his thighs but not his underwear, and spanked him, hard, over and over. The sharp crack of each hit echoed in that dead silent room. Tad didn't cry, didn't resist, didn't even breathe loudly. He just endured. His shoulders trembled, but he made no sound. Because this wasn't the first time. Mr. Smith looked directly at me while striking his son, his eyes burning with a clear, unspoken message. "This is what will happen if you defy me again." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. My heart broke for Tad. Every ounce of bravery I had evaporated, replaced with terror and guilt. I couldn't fight this man. If I ran, Tad would pay for it. So when Tad was finally released, shaking and humiliated, and Mr. Smith told me to finish eating every bite on my plate, I did. I forced down the raw turkey, the crunching undercooked pasta, the bitter vegetables, all while my stomach churned violently, every swallow burned. By the time the miserable dessert arrived, some slimy jello with sad chunks of fruit, no one spoke. No one breathed wrong. We ate in absolute silence, waiting for the ordeal to end. Finally, Mr. Smith dismissed me with one last humiliated command. "Leave and reflect on the shame you've brought on yourself and your family, It was a 1 hour walk home in the cold night air, but I'd have walked 10 hours rather than ask that man to use his phone. When I reached home, my parents greeted me cheerfully, asking if I wanted dessert. I snapped, burst into tears, ran upstairs, and vomited violently, the first sign of the food poisoning that would keep me bedridden for 3 full days. While sick in bed, I told them everything: the slap, the rules, the dinner, the humiliation. What he did to Tad? And the moment I said, "Mr. Smith struck me," I saw my father's hands clench into fists, his whole body trembling with rage. I thought he'd storm out of the house and confront the man, my heroic dad, ready to unleash the fury I'd held back. But instead, they surprised me. "Different families have different customs," my mother said gently. "Don't blame Tad, just don't go back there." It felt like a gut punch. I wanted justice. I wanted someone to stand up for me and for Tad, but all I got was a warning to avoid the family, and sympathy without action. And yet, 6 months later, the truth would surface, because Mr. Smith didn't just disappear, he ran. And the rumors that spread afterward? They changed everything. 6 months passed. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least something resembling normal. Tad and I stayed friends, just like my parents insisted, but he was different now. A little more withdrawn, a little more nervous, like he'd spent years walking on shards of glass. Yet somehow, around me, he relaxed. We still laughed, still talked, still tried to be normal teenagers. But neither of us ever mentioned that Thanksgiving night. Then one warm afternoon, everything changed. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Mr. Smith was gone. Just gone, vanished without warning, without a note, without a trace. He had simply walked out of his family's life and never returned. At first, the story was that he had run off with a stripper from a local club. People whispered about how humiliating it was for the Smith family, how it made sense that a man like him might disappear into the night chasing someone younger. But then the other rumors started, darker ones. Ones that matched the man I had met at that horrible Thanksgiving dinner. My dad had friends on the police force, and cops tend to talk. The whispers were ugly. Mr. Smith was a known curb crawler in the red light district. He had a reputation for inappropriate behavior with the boys he coached in Little League. There were quiet rumors of him being caught doing things that would ruin a man's life if made public. Most horrifying of all, one rumor said someone gave him an ultimatum: leave town, or face consequences. And from the way people talked, from the way my dad reacted, from the pointed looks he gave me whenever Tad was mentioned, I knew exactly who had delivered that ultimatum and why. But I never asked. Neither did Tad. Some truths are better left buried. Once Mr. Smith was gone, it was as if Tad blossomed overnight. All the tension melted from his shoulders, all the fear drained from his eyes. He went from class clown to valedictorian. His grades shot up. His confidence grew, his whole personality expanded now that he wasn't living under the boot of a tyrant. Every Thanksgiving after that, Tad spent the holiday with my family. We welcomed him, truly welcomed him, with food, warmth, laughter, and the kind of love that felt foreign in the Smith home. And every year, when it was Tad's turn to share what he was thankful for, he would say, "I'm thankful for whatever made my dad show his true self." And every time he said it, my own father would give me a subtle look, a knowing wink, one that communicated far more than words ever could. He was telling me, "You're safe now. Tad is safe now." I took care of it, and I never asked for details. Neither did Tad. We didn't want to know. Over the years, Mr. Smith tried contacting Tad, always begging for money, always with some manipulative sob story. Tad ignored every message, blocked every call, refused every plea. But occasionally his father referenced the mysterious ultimatum, the one that forced him to abandon his family, as if trying to guilt Tad into believing he had somehow caused it. He hadn't, and we all knew that Mr. Smith's departure wasn't about guilt or fear or shame. It was simply justice finally catching up to him. Sometimes life really does give people what they deserve. And for that, Tad always said he was thankful. This happened back in the late 2000s when my younger cousins, 2 boys, 8 and 9, were absolute menaces. And I say that with love. They were terrors, but they were our terrors. Loud, hyperactive, wild as feral cats, and always plotting their next prank. The family jokingly called them the twins, even though they weren't related by blood, had different moms, and weren't even born in the same month. What they did share was chaos. They adored causing jump scares, pranking relatives, setting up goofy traps, and ambushing people with dollar store gimmicks like exploding gum or water-squirting lighters. They were the kind of kids who always had a whoopee cushion in one hand and a mischievous grin on their faces, and honestly, we loved them for it. The truth behind their chaotic energy was less funny, though. Their family history was tangled, heartbreakingly so. One boy's mother had died in a car accident barely a month after giving birth. The other boy was the result of a consolation hookup between my uncle and one of his best friends, a pregnancy they decided to keep despite the circumstances. Somehow, against all odds, everyone involved managed to stay civil, even warm, and my uncle eventually married a wonderful woman who became stepmom to both boys. No matter how complicated their beginnings were, both boys worshipped their baby half-sister, adored my uncle, and brought so much life into every family gathering. And despite everything, despite all the hardship and confusion, the boys were bright, affectionate, and unbelievably close. They were partners in crime, always whispering, always planning, and they lived for big holidays like Thanksgiving. But none of us, least of all them, knew that one careless prank that year would become the moment our entire family fractured forever. That Halloween, the boys had gone trick-or-treating as creepy pumpkin ghouls, skeleton print bodysuits with eerie jack-o'-lantern masks. They were proud of those costumes, too proud. Proud enough that, in their young logic, pumpkins also existed on Thanksgiving, so why not reuse the masks for a new prank? They smuggled them inside their backpacks to our family's holiday gathering, giggling like they were masterminding the heist of the century. Thanksgiving Day was bustling in the best way, the kitchen overflowing with the smells of roasting meat, sweet potatoes, spices, gravy simmering on the stove. In our family, the women, Grandma, my mom, and my uncle's wife, were the culinary champions. They practically ran the kitchen like a well-oiled machine, while the rest of us stayed out of their way. And that's exactly where the twins planned to strike. Their genius idea? Hide inside the narrow broom closet in the kitchen, wait for the perfect moment, and jump out screaming at whoever approached. It was classic twin chaos, and normally, it would have been harmless. But fate had other plans that day. Grandma was the unlucky target, the one preparing the gravy boats. She had just finished mixing a large, heavy bowl of thick gravy when the closet door burst open and two pumpkin-masked gremlins leaped out, shrieking their spooky nonsense. Grandma, who'd endured countless pranks from those boys over the years, still wasn't prepared for this one. She gasped, a sharp, panicked inhale, and the enormous gravy dish slipped from her hands. It shattered on the tile floor. Boiling hot gravy splashed everywhere, mixing with shards of ceramic. The smell hit the air instantly, thick, savory, overwhelming. And then Grandma's face changed. The boys later described it with trembling voices, her hand clutching her chest, her breathing suddenly ragged, her knees struggling to hold her up. She managed to collapse into a chair near the breakfast bar, pale and trembling, insisting she just needed a moment. The twins ripped off their masks, terrified, apologizing over and over, crowding her with frantic little hands. Grandma gently pushed them back, wheezing for space. For one awful second, the boys truly believed they had given Grandma a heart attack. But what happened next? None of us could have imagined. And nothing, not in our worst nightmares, prepared us for the tragedy that followed. Grandma was still clutching her chest, breathing fast but insisting she only needed a minute. Her voice trembled, but she tried to smile for the boys' sake, telling them she was fine. Even though the fear in their eyes said they didn't believe her. I was rushing toward the kitchen when the next moment unfolded, the one that would mark the day, forever in all our memories. Granddad came running. He'd heard the crash of the shattered gravy boat from the other room, and being the protective, old-fashioned man he was, he burst through the doorway at full speed to make sure his wife was okay. What none of us could have known was that the entire section of floor near the doorway was now coated in thick, slippery gravy. The moment Granddad's foot touched the tile, he lost control. His legs shot forward, his arms spun wildly in the air. For a split second, his flailing looked almost comical, the kind of thing you might laugh about if this were a sitcom instead of real life. But then time snapped, the humor vanished, and gravity did the rest. Granddad fell forward with brutal speed, headfirst, with nothing to break his fall. His nose collided with the sharp corner of the kitchen table. The sound, God, I will never forget that sound. It wasn't a thud, it wasn't a crack. It was something in between, a sickening combination of impact and breaking bone. They say the blow drove the bone upward into his brain, killing him instantly. But I know that wasn't true because I saw it. I saw everything. Granddad hit the floor, body twisted unnaturally, blood spreading quickly beneath him, a dark, horrifying pool mixing with the spilled gravy. His limbs spasmed, his fingers clawing at the tile. His neck, the angle was wrong, so wrong it made my stomach turn. He was alive for nearly a minute, writhing, gasping, suffering, and all we could do was watch, frozen, hysterical, helpless. Grandma sobbed his name from her chair. The twins fell to their knees, screaming and crying, shaking him as if they could wake him from a nightmare. I stood there in shock, my brain unable to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. It was fast, brutal, final, and right then, the moment Granddad went still, our family changed forever. The twins blamed themselves immediately. Grandma blamed herself too, for dropping the gravy, for being startled, for not being strong enough. We all tried to tell them it wasn't their fault. We all tried to convince them that it was a tragic accident, nothing more. But none of that mattered, not to them, because sometimes emotions don't need logic to destroy you. What happened next only deepened the wound. Grandma didn't even make it to Granddad's funeral. 3 days after his death, she passed away quietly in her sleep. Her heart, the same heart that had panicked during the prank, simply gave out, and of course, the twins blamed themselves for that too. In their young minds, they hadn't just caused one death. They had caused 2. The guilt hollowed them out, carving grief into their tiny bones long before they were old enough to understand how the world works. And though we all insisted that it wasn't their fault, that kids should never carry the weight of such tragedies, the damage was done. One twin made it to 18 before life crushed him completely. The other is still alive. Barely in and out of rehab, haunted, broken. The kind of broken that can take an entire lifetime to mend if it ever does. Every Thanksgiving since then, I look around at the people I love, at whoever is still here, and the same reminder hits me like a cold wind. One moment, one accident, one stupid prank can change everything. After the funerals, 2 funerals, back to back, the most devastating week our family had endured, the house fell into a kind of hollow quiet that didn't feel real. A silence so deep it made the air feel heavy. Everyone tried to move forward. Everyone tried to be strong for the twins. But the truth was, none of us knew how to reach them. Because they weren't the same kids anymore. The prank-loving, mischievous, pumpkin-masked twins were gone. What remained were 2 boys haunted by a tragedy far too big for their young hearts to hold. The younger one barely spoke for weeks. The older one had nightmares every night, waking up screaming, sweating, begging for someone to take him back to a time when a prank was just a prank. They tried therapy, counseling, church groups, support groups, everything. But the thing about guilt is, when a child believes they killed their grandparents, no amount of logic, therapy, or adult reassurance can remove it. We all told them the truth. It was an accident. Grandma was startled, not harmed by the prank. Granddad slipped. That was no one's fault. Grandma's heart condition was the real cause of her passing. But the boys were convinced, absolutely convinced, that they had broken their family. And once a belief like that sinks its claws into a child, it doesn't let go easily. The older twin started acting out first, not mischievously, but destructively, punching walls, skipping school, getting into fights, doing anything to punish himself. The younger twin withdrew completely, quiet, detached, a ghost of the loud, goofy boy he once was. And we, the adults, were helpless. We watched two sweet, energetic boys unravel under the crushing weight of grief they weren't equipped to understand. The older one didn't make it to adulthood. Whatever inner battle he was fighting consumed him long before he turned 18. The younger one survived, physically, but mentally, emotionally, he's still trapped in that kitchen, still staring at the broken gravy boat, still hearing the slap of Granddad's fall, still believing he caused everything. He's been in and out of rehab. We all do what we can: visits, calls, letters, support, but the guilt has its hooks deep in him. He can't forgive himself. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And every year, when Thanksgiving comes around, the entire family knows we're tiptoeing around the memory of that one moment that changed everything. We don't blame the boys. We never did. We never will. But that doesn't matter when the people who need forgiveness the most are the ones who refuse to accept it. My family has always leaned conservative. Not aggressively, not politically obsessed, just traditionally minded. Thanksgiving for us was usually calm, warm, respectful. No political arguments, no shouting matches. Just food, family, and the unspoken agreement to keep sensitive topics off the table. Except for my uncle. My uncle, my mama's sister's husband, was the one fully committed Republican in the family. The type who proudly displayed NRA stickers, wore the red hat, and spent half his free time at the shooting range. But even then, he was a respectful man, never pushing his views on others, never causing drama. So when I sensed trouble brewing that Thanksgiving in 2023, it wasn't because of him. It was because my sister showed up with her new boyfriend, and from the second he walked through the door, everything felt wrong. He was the type of guy who carried arrogance like a cologne, cold politeness, smarmy smile, a voice dripping with judgment. My sister, normally bubbly and bright, looked small standing beside him. Her hair was dyed in neon blue and pink streaks, a style she'd once made fun of. Her eyes flickered with quiet apologies directed at me, though she never said a word. We're twins, my sister and I know her expressions better than anyone, and I could see fear hiding behind her forced smile. Still, we all tried to be welcoming. It was Thanksgiving, after all. But then he opened his mouth. At dinner, without warning, he announced that he was vegan, loudly, dramatically, as if he were revealing a medical emergency. My mom, ever the hostess, immediately went to the kitchen to check ingredient labels, trying to find what dishes he could eat. There were plenty: vegetables, rolls, sides. Enough for a full plate. But he sneered at the list she brought him, shaking his head. Guess I'll have to make an exception this time. And then, without irony, the man piled his plate high with turkey, ham, pigs in a blanket, and every non-vegan food on the table. He devoured it like a man who hadn't seen meat in years. I looked at my sister. Her cheeks were red with embarrassment. Her eyes said, "Please, just ignore him." That's when I started to worry. If she was already walking on eggshells, what had he done when no one else was around? We reached about 2/3 through the meal before things truly fell apart. Someone made casual conversation about the weather. Someone else mentioned the football game. Everyone knew not to bring up politics. But Jack, that was his name, though Jack might have been short for something cruder, paused mid-bite, set down his fork, and said with a smug grin, "Nice truck in the driveway." Didn't know Mitt Romney was here. Mitt Romney, of all Republicans to mock. It was such a bizarre, specific jab that we all exchanged confused looks. My sister silently begged me with her eyes not to react. Uncle Ron, patient, controlled, gave a tight chuckle. "Mitt Romney? Come on, son. At least compare me to someone fun. Hulk Hogan, maybe." It should have ended there. But Jack leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said, "I don't think being a MAGA is cool in any universe." And just like that, he launched into a rant about Roe v. Wade, gun owners, conservative voters, people like us, and every hot-button issue he could fit into one breath. My sister placed a hand on his arm, begging him to stop. He shrugged her off. Hard, my stomach turned. I recognized that gesture, that dismissive, irritated shake-off. The kind of move that says, "Don't interrupt me." It wasn't loud, but it was violent in a quiet way. I gave my uncle a look, the silent telegraph we'd always shared. Let's mess with him, Uncle Ron understood instantly. He started talking to me loudly about the shooting range, the guns he owned, the new ones he wanted to buy, the hunting trip we were planning. Casual but intentional, just enough to poke at Jack's already fragile ego. And like clockwork, Jack exploded. Gun culture is disgusting. Unstable people can buy guns. Someone like him, he added, pointing at my uncle, shouldn't even be allowed near one. We should have seen the next moment coming, but none of us did. Because suddenly this vegan pacifist, this man who democked gun owners and bragged about morality, reached into his cardigan and pulled out a pistol. He had been concealed carrying the entire time. The room froze. My sister gasped. My mother covered her mouth. My cousins went silent. Uncle Ron, unarmed at a family dinner, stared directly into the barrel, and the look on my sister's face? I knew instantly. This wasn't the first time Jack had done something like this. My blood ran cold. Jack waved the gun, voice shaking with rage. You all think you're better than me. Let's see you laugh now, before anyone could move, before anyone could breathe. Something unexpected happened. A blur swung from behind him. A heavy vase, my great-grandmother's old ceramic heirloom, smashed into the back of his skull with a crack loud enough to ring through the room. Jack collapsed. The gun flew out of his hand. His chair toppled over. And in the doorway stood my sister, breathing hard, hands shaking, eyes blazing with fury. She had knocked him out cold. Jack hit the floor hard, his legs sprawled awkwardly beneath him, his eyes rolled back, lips slack. The vase, or what was left of it, lay in shattered pieces around his head. A fine dust of ceramic powder floated in the air like smoke. And for a long, breathless moment, no one moved. The room was silent except for the sharp, ragged breathing of my sister as she stared down at the man she'd just struck. I rushed forward, snatching up the gun before Jack had a chance to regain consciousness. My hands were shaking, but I flicked through the motions quickly, finger off the trigger, barrel pointed away from anyone. Safety check. My heart dropped. The safety was still on, which meant Jack had no idea how to use the gun. He'd been waving around a loaded firearm, threatening my uncle, with the safety on the whole time, like a child pretending to know what he was doing. My sister explained between trembling breaths. I saw it. I saw the safety, so I knew he couldn't shoot. But if he figured it out, if he realized, I couldn't risk it. Her voice cracked, but her hands stayed steady. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had saved my uncle's life, maybe all of ours. Jack groaned, not quite conscious, but not fully gone either. A pathetic, broken sound. From somewhere behind us, Uncle Ron finally moved. He stood tall, shoulders squared, face hard with a kind of quiet fury I had rarely seen in him. Not explosive anger, something colder. He looked at Jack's limp body and said calmly, "We're calling the cops." And we did. The police arrived fast, faster than I expected for Thanksgiving night. My uncle explained everything, from Jack's threats to the moment my sister knocked him out. Jack tried to defend himself when he woke up. He rambled. He lied. He contradicted himself. But there was no talking out of what he'd done. He pulled a loaded gun at a family dinner. He shoved my sister. He instigated a fight. He threatened a room full of people. And worst of all, he had a documented history with her. Things she'd been hiding, things she'd been excusing, things she had been too scared to tell us. And we saw it now, all of it. In the way her eyes flickered when he yelled, in the way she recoiled when he reached for her, even unconscious. Jack was not just unpleasant. He was abusive, manipulative, dangerous. In the days that followed, my sister broke up with him, blocked him, filed a restraining order, and reported him for multiple incidents she had hidden out of shame or fear. I only wish she had told us earlier. We would have protected her sooner. We would have gotten her out. But victims often think they're alone until something shatters the illusion. In this case, a ceramic vase. Uncle Ron, being the responsible gun owner he always was, reported Jack's misuse of a firearm. Between that and the police report, Jack lost the right to own a gun, permanently. At family gatherings, Uncle Ron sometimes retold the story with a comedic twist. The chaos, the political argument, the dramatic vase swing, the gun safety being on the whole time. And somehow it became the family's wild Thanksgiving story, but I never quite laughed. Because after everything came to light, the manipulation, the control, the psychological torment, I realized something. I didn't want to scare Jack with political debates, or troll him, or mock him. I wanted him to feel the fear he made my sister feel. I wanted him to know what it was like to be powerless. And I wanted him out of her life forever. He is, and thank God for that. I've been running a Meals on Wheels service for years, and while the job can be exhausting, it's deeply meaningful to me. I deliver meals year-round, but on Thanksgiving, I always put in a little extra effort, something warm, something special, something that feels like home. There was one client in particular, an elderly man I only cooked for on Thanksgiving. The rest of the year he managed fine by himself, but on that holiday, he always treated himself to a hot meal and some company. And he always met me at the door with the same bright, toothy smile, dentures slightly crooked, but full of warmth. He didn't have family, so I tried to make the visit feel like family. Thanksgiving 2018, I arrived at his house with a beautifully prepared ham roast. I was excited to see him. I expected the same familiar smile. Instead, a stranger answered the door. He was young, mid-20s maybe, and his expression was confused at first. I explained who I was, that I was there to cook Thanksgiving dinner for the elderly gentleman who lived here. He blinked, then said, Grandpa must have gotten the timing wrong. He's in the bathroom. You can come in and start cooking." Nothing about his tone felt wrong, so I stepped inside. He rushed upstairs quickly, calling through the bathroom door, "Meals on Wheels lady's here. She's cooking for you," but I didn't hear a single reply. And at first, I didn't think anything of it. People shower. People take their hearing aids out. People have water running. I focused on the kitchen, warming the ham in the oven, letting the house fill with the comforting scent of cloves and honey glaze. When everything was heating nicely, I wandered into the living room, and that's when something felt off. There were photographs everywhere, decades of memories lining the walls, but none of them included the young man upstairs. Not a single one. In fact, every picture I saw suggested my elderly client had no living family. He had told me this many times. So who was upstairs? A grandson who didn't exist? A caretaker? A tenant? A stranger? A cold weight settled in my stomach? I called out, "Is he almost ready? The food's nearly done." The young man yelled back, annoyed, Yeah. Just helping him get dressed." Helping him dress? That made no sense. My client was perfectly capable, sharp, independent, energetic, and suddenly, everything clicked. The silence upstairs, the stranger, the grandpa who never answered, the growing irritation in the young man's voice. Something was wrong, badly wrong. I turned off the oven and called upstairs again, this time louder. "I have other clients today. I'm heading out." No response. A warning bell rang in my mind. I walked to the front door. It was locked, deadbolted from the inside, with a type of lock that requires a key even from the inside. My van and my phone were outside. I was trapped. I rushed to the back door, locked, deadbolted. Panic rose like a tide. I hurried to the living room, searching for a phone, a window latch, anything. But before I could act, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. The young man stood in the doorway, in nothing but tidy whities, and a vile grin stretched across his face. His eyes traveled over me in a way that made my skin crawl. He started talking, the kind of talk that makes your soul leave your body. A dried-up old hag like you should be flattered. "I'll even pay you if you do certain things." My heart slammed in my chest. My breath caught in fear and disgust. I told him to unlock the door right now or I would call the police. He laughed, a cold, delusional laugh, like the idea was impossible. Then he stepped closer, and in a voice dripping with twisted intent, he said, "I'm going to touch you, and depending on how I feel, I might bury your body in the basement." I realized then he wasn't bluffing. He was high. He was dangerous. And he had locked me in this house for a reason. But I also realized something he didn't. I wasn't alone with him. There were fireplace tools behind me, and I knew exactly where they were. He took another step toward me, that disgusting grin widening, his eyes glassy and unfocused, pupils blown wide in a way that told me he wasn't just dangerous, he was chemically unpredictable. His voice hit a lower, more chilling register. You broke in here, which means I get to defend myself. His logic was nonsense. His confidence was horrifying. My pulse hammered in my ears. I backed up, slowly, keeping him in my line of sight while my hand reached behind me. I knew there were tools by the fireplace, a poker, a long-handled brush, and the metal dustpan, heavy enough to hurt, light enough to swing. My fingers brushed cold iron. He stepped closer. I grabbed the dustpan, and I swung. Crack. The metal slammed into his groin with a sickening force. His breath left him in a high, broken shriek as he folded to the ground, clutching himself, wheezing air like someone had punched the soul out of him. But I didn't stop. I hit him again, to WSEK, the underside of the pan connected, this time with deliberate precision. He screamed, not in anger, but in agony, rolling onto his side, kicking weakly, whimpering. Later, police would quietly tell me I'd probably broken something delicate that men value dearly, which would become the very reason he avoided prison time. And also the reason he'd think twice before ever trying to assault someone again. Breathing hard, adrenaline blasting through me, I sprinted to the front door. The deadbolt was still locked, but the keys were sitting on a small side table, carelessly left there, as though he never expected resistance. My hands shook violently as I unlocked the door. Cold air rushed in as I flung it open. I didn't look back. I didn't speak. I didn't care whether he could stand. I ran. I ran all the way to my van parked outside, nearly collapsing as I fumbled for my phone. Once inside, I locked the doors and dialed the police with trembling fingers. When officers arrived, they found him inside the house, injured, furious, incoherent, and extremely high. Later tests showed he had taken an absurd amount of cocaine. But the worst truth came after. My elderly client, the sweet man with the crooked dentures and warm smile, had passed away a week earlier, alone. No family to report it. No one to discontinue his Meals on Wheels service. His home had been quickly rented out. To the man who tried to trap me. A sick coincidence of timing. The new tenant, high out of his mind on Thanksgiving Day, had tried to turn me into his victim simply because I walked through the door expecting kindness and routine. He received a suspended sentence because my second swing with the dustpan caused significant bodily harm that gave his lawyer leverage. But to me, it was worth it. I know, in my heart, that I prevented him from ever trying something similar again. I'm thankful for my aim. Thankful for my instincts, thankful for the strength that came from pure survival, and above all, I am thankful that I walked out of that house alive. People joke about overprotective mothers, but mine? She takes the crown in the most loving way possible. She raised me almost entirely on her own until she met my stepdad. She worked herself half to death to give me a good life. So her worrying wasn't annoying, it was proof she cared. Proof she'd survived enough fear in the past to always imagine the worst. A couple years ago, she stumbled onto an article that claimed, "The night before Thanksgiving has the highest DUI rate of the entire year." I didn't even know that was a thing. Apparently it's so common that people call it Drinksgiving. Mom read that and immediately decided that I, her adult son, would be abducted, hit by a drunk driver, or somehow killed in a freak alcohol-fueled tragedy while doing something as ordinary as driving to work. And unfortunately for me, I was scheduled for the night shift at Kroger on Drinksgiving. The moment she found out, she spiraled. I'm talking charts, articles, statistics, what-if scenarios. Eventually I promised her, fine, I'll walk. I won't drive at all. It was a 40-minute walk each way, but the relief on her face made it worth it. And honestly, the idea of a chilly evening walk with some music in my ears didn't sound too bad. My shift that night was normal enough, at least for the first half. We closed up the store, restocked shelves, cleaned. The only standout moment was a guy who came in destroyed, staggering, slurring, hanging onto shelves for balance. I stayed close to the checkout because one of my younger coworkers was on register duty, but he didn't give her trouble. He paid for his stuff and stumbled back into the parking lot. And then, to my horror, I watched him climb into the driver's seat of his car. No hesitation, no struggle. Just got in and drove off, swerving like a snake. I memorized the license plate and called it in. I don't feel even a little guilty about that. Drunk drivers can get absolutely wrecked as far as I'm concerned. When my shift ended, I bundled up, put on my headphones, and started my long, quiet walk home. Taylor Swift was playing. Yeah, I'm a low-key fan. Sue me. I walked with my eyes on the sidewalk, avoiding patches of ice, and then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of squealing tires. Fast. Erratic. Uncontrolled. My head snapped up. A car was swerving violently across the road, fishtailing, overcorrecting, the headlights jerking like the driver had no control at all. I had seconds, maybe less. The vehicle lurched sideways, skidding toward me, mounting the sidewalk with terrifying speed. There was no time to think. My body acted on pure instinct. I dove backward into the recessed doorway of a closed shop, a shallow alcove that stuck out from the main building. The metal frame hit my back hard just as, crash, the car slammed into the brick wall. Concrete cracked, metal crumpled. Headlights exploded into shards. And the bumper stopped less than an inch from my legs. I froze, completely numb, certain I was either dead or paralyzed. I collapsed onto the hood, shaking uncontrollably as the driver leapt out, shouting, "Oh God, are you okay? Can you feel your legs? Are you hurt?" His voice was frantic, not slurred, not drunk, but terrified. Eventually, after what felt like a long time, I managed to speak. And when the police arrived and breathalyzed him, totally sober. He'd hit a patch of black ice, lost control, and the car had spun straight toward me by sheer nightmare coincidence. He was horrified, sincerely horrified. He insisted I go to the hospital. I refused. I wasn't hurt beyond a few cuts and bruises. He paid for my Uber home, apologizing the entire time. A week later, he mailed me a letter, and inside was a check for $1,000. The note read, "Your life is worth immeasurably more than this. But it's the least I can do, and every year since then, on Thanksgiving, I give thanks for something simple. I survived Drinksgiving. And my mother, bless her heart, was right to worry. Last year was my first Thanksgiving alone. I had just moved across the country and couldn't afford to fly back home, and even though my dad and stepmom tried to make me feel included with a sweet little Zoom party the night before decorations, jokes, a toast, the truth was I felt painfully isolated. So I decided to take that loneliness and turn it into something good, something meaningful. I volunteered at a local soup kitchen, the kind of place that struggles hardest during the holidays. When I asked if they needed help, the woman who managed it, a large, warm-hearted lady named Belinda, hugged me like I'd just given her the greatest gift in the world. And honestly, that hug alone made me feel less alone. Thanksgiving morning, I arrived early. There were already people waiting in line, bundled in ragged coats, hands tucked into sleeves, faces tired but hopeful. Belinda greeted them all by name. They clearly adored her. She introduced me as the new volunteer helping for Thanksgiving. I added, honestly, hopefully more than just today, if Belinda will have me. A few smiles appeared in the crowd. It felt good, it felt right. Belinda unlocked the doors, letting everyone escape the biting cold, even though we wouldn't serve food for another hour. That small act of kindness, warmth before nourishment, told me everything I needed to know about her. Inside, the kitchen was bustling. Volunteers arrived, ovens fired up, and we began heating donated dishes, beautifully roasted turkeys, glazed hams, casseroles from local restaurants, far more than I expected. It was the busiest Thanksgiving they'd ever had. By the time the soup finished simmering, a fragrant pumpkin and chestnut blend, every seat was full and the line stretched out the door. Belinda put me on soup duty. So there I stood, ladling steaming portions into paper cups, handing each one across the counter with a smile and a heartfelt, "Happy Thanksgiving," and, in my head, a silent prayer, "May Christ be with you. May you feel seen today." Cup after cup, face after face. Then a voice cut through the noise. "Give me soup." It wasn't loud, but sharp, cold, irritated. I looked up, and I will never forget what I saw. A man who looked like he'd lived 10 lifetimes of pain. Easily in his 80s, blind in one eye, the other a pale, piercing blue. His face was a map of scars, his skin weathered like leather left in the sun too long. He wore a military-style coat that hung off his wiry frame, and his hands were wrapped in ragged, fingerless gloves. He stared at me with a look I'd never encountered before. Pure contempt. I tried to be polite, thinking maybe I'd misheard. "Soup's coming right up, sir." He didn't soften. If anything, his anger sharpened. He looked me up and down, really examined me, and I saw the moment he decided he despised me. Then he launched into a rant. A venomous, hate-filled stream accusing me of being a sanctimonious rich girl, calling my chest fake, calling my presence a performance, saying Christians like me only volunteer to buy a fast pass into heaven. His voice was full of a lifetime-esque bitterness, and he was pouring it all onto me. I wanted to defend myself, explain myself, tell him that I understood suffering in ways he couldn't imagine, that my childhood wasn't sunshine and blessings, that I'd survived things I still couldn't talk about. But I knew none of that mattered. He didn't want understanding. He wanted a target. So I did what I'd learned to do in moments like this. I refused to give him the reaction he wanted. I handed him the soup with the kindest smile I could muster. "I hope you enjoy it." "Happy Thanksgiving." That should have been the end of it, but instead, it enraged him. More than anything I could have said? He grabbed the cup, the scalding hot soup, sneered at me, called me the C-word, and threw it directly into my face. Everything went white, hot, then cold, then numb. People gasped, someone screamed, chairs scraped. The world spun. I didn't even feel myself collapsing. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital bed. When I opened my eyes, the world was blurry and painfully bright, hospital lights overhead, monitors beeping softly, the smell of antiseptic hanging in the air. For a moment, I couldn't remember what had happened. Then the pain hit. A deep, burning throb across my cheek, a sharp sting in my eye, a tightness in my skin that felt foreign. I reached up and felt bandages. Belinda was sitting beside my bed, her eyes puffy and red. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. The moment she saw I was awake, she burst into tears, a trembling, choked sob that carried so much guilt and shock it nearly broke me. I tried to speak, but my voice was hoarse. "The soup kitchen. Did you shut it down?" Belinda actually laughed, a broken, emotional laugh, and wiped her cheeks. "No, sweetheart, we kept it open. Everyone got fed." I made sure of it. That was when the doctor came in and explained what had happened. The soup had been boiling hot. Normal skin would have blistered or burned, painful, but temporary. But I have a rare skin condition, one that makes my skin extremely sensitive to heat. The scalding liquid didn't just burn me. It removed patches of skin on my cheek and sent my body into shock so severe that I collapsed unconscious. The man who threw the soup fled immediately after attacking me. He slipped through the crowd and vanished before anyone realized what happened. No one caught him. No one even knew his name. To him, it was just another act of cruelty in a world where he felt unseen. To me, it was permanent. My cheek was scarred. Not enough for a graft, but enough to stay with me forever, a patch of discolored, textured skin that would never fully heal. Over time it would resemble a birthmark, they said. Unique, unmistakable. Worse, the soup had splashed into my right eye. I needed emergency surgery to save my vision. The operation worked, thank God, but a portion of the eye remained permanently bloodshot. A reminder of the moment my kindness was punished with violence. When they told me the man hadn't been caught, I felt hollow. There was no justice, no closure, no apology, just a scar, and yet none of that stopped me. Most people would never step foot in that soup kitchen again. Most people would call it trauma and move on. Most people would lock the door behind them and never look back. But I'm not most people. And the next week, still bandaged, still hurting, still healing, I went back. Belinda nearly fainted when she saw me walk through the door. But I told her exactly what I believed. One cruel person is not the world. One attacker doesn't erase the dozens of people who needed that meal. And I meant it. Still, a part of me, a dark, quiet part buried deep, held on to something else, something sharp, something that waited. A part of me hoped that man might return someday, and if he did, I knew exactly what I would do. Every family has Thanksgiving traditions, some cute, some bizarre, some Downright foolish. Ours fell firmly into the last category, and no one embodied that chaotic spirit more than my dad. I love the man, truly. He's kind-hearted, generous, and endlessly supportive. But he's also, without exaggeration, a complete goofball. A boomer dad with all the classic traits, terrible at jokes, accidentally offensive at restaurants, constantly sending outdated memes, the king of cringeworthy puns. He once nearly ruined an important work contract by emailing a Minions meme to a potential client. Another time he tried to prank my mom on April 1st. Except he did it on March 31st because he forgot April has 30 days. So, when I say my dad had a tradition that would eventually cost him a hand, you can understand why none of us were surprised, just horrified. For years he performed the same gag every Thanksgiving before carving the turkey. He took our old electric carving knife, a dull, ancient serrated thing that barely cut butter, placed the blade dramatically over his wrist, and pretended to saw into his arm. The little kids always gasped, the adults always rolled their eyes. And then he would flick the switch, the knife unpowered, of course, to prove how tough his skin was. It was stupid, yes, but harmless. We'd all grown used to it. Then came the year everything fell apart. Our old knife had finally died. Mom replaced it with a modern electric carving knife, sleek, sharp, and rechargeable. She told Dad repeatedly, "Don't do your stupid joke this year, I mean it," he promised. But my dad's promises have the structural integrity of wet paper. Thanksgiving dinner rolled around. 15 people gathered around the table, laughing, chatting, waiting for Dad to make the first slice. He stood proudly at the head of the table, knife in hand. And despite Mom's warnings, despite common sense, despite the fact that everyone was watching, he did it. He pressed the blade against his wrist. Everyone groaned. "Oh God, not this again," someone muttered. But this time the blade was actually sharp. Dad winced immediately. He jerked slightly and the knife bit into his skin. A thin line of red appeared. "Jesus!" he hissed, flinching, but reflex is a powerful thing. Pain made his other hand spasm. His finger hit the power switch. The knife turned on. The blade sliced clean through his wrist, like it was cutting cloth, like it was slicing butter. Blood sprayed across the Thanksgiving table, onto the turkey, onto plates, onto relatives who screamed and stumbled backward, chairs tipping over. Dad stared down at his own hand lying on the table, severed, fingers curled, palm up, and he didn't scream. He just whispered, That's not good?" Shock can make people incredibly calm. I, on the other hand, sprang into action. The knife was still vibrating on the table, dangerous and slick with blood. I slapped the switch, grabbed Dad's hand, and yelled for someone to get ice. Chaos erupted. Kids were crying. Mom was shrieking. Grandparents were praying. Someone yelled, "Call 911." Someone else yelled, "The ambulance will take too long." I didn't wait for either. I threw Dad in the back seat of my car, hand wrapped in a towel, stuck his severed hand, bagged, and on ice, in the passenger seat, and burned rubber straight toward the He was woozy, pale, drifting in and out of awareness. But at one point during the drive, one unforgettable, infuriating moment, he muttered, "Thanks for giving me a hand. Baby girl, if he weren't actively bleeding out, I would have smacked him." We reached the in record time. Nurses rushed Dad away the moment they saw the bloody towel wrapped around his wrist. I followed with the plastic bag holding his severed hand, the same hand he had so proudly pretended to saw off every Thanksgiving for years. I waited in the lobby, adrenaline wearing off, exhaustion crashing in hard. My clothes were stained, my hands were shaking, and I'd never been more furious or terrified in my life. Mom arrived not long after, practically vibrating with panic. When the surgeon eventually came out to speak with us, his expression said everything before he even opened his mouth. They couldn't save the hand. The cut had been too violent, too ragged, too much nerve damage for reconstruction. Even with immediate surgery, the chance of restoring function was almost zero. Mom tried to come up with a less embarrassing story for why Dad lost his hand, something about a power tool accident or a freak mishap in the garage. But everyone knew. You don't show up at a hospital on Thanksgiving with a serrated carving knife wound and fool the staff. Dad woke up later, groggy and pale, staring at his bandaged stump with quiet disbelief. I prepared myself for tears, anger, regret, something human. Instead, he sighed, leaned back, and said with the driest humor imaginable, "Well, at least it wasn't my good hand. Classic Dad. The man could lose a limb and still crack a joke." Life adjusted. Dad got a prosthetic hand, a surprisingly advanced one, complete with flexible fingers. And of course, in true boomer dad fashion, he used it for every prank imaginable. He'd pretend it detached unexpectedly. He'd drop it in front of strangers. He once left it in the fridge so Mom would scream when she reached for the milk. But the best prank came the following Thanksgiving. My daughter brought her new boyfriend, a shy, respectful high school senior meeting our chaotic family for the first time. Dad waited behind him, then casually placed the cold prosthetic hand right on the boy's lap and said, "This is what happened to the last guy who got handsy with my granddaughter." Bless that boy. He didn't even flinch. Just picked up the prosthetic hand, turned to Dad, and shook it politely. "Nice to meet you, sir." I swear, Dad nearly adopted him on the spot. That's how my goofy, lovable, utterly ridiculous father learned the ultimate lesson. If you joke long enough about losing a hand, eventually you might actually lose one. And even now, every Thanksgiving, when he raises his prosthetic hand to carve the turkey with a much safer knife, we all burst out laughing. Because somehow, through blood, panic, chaos, and wild family tradition, Dad found a way to turn tragedy into humor. And honestly, that feels exactly like something to be thankful for.